When the original Switch came out, it was a popular choice for a lot of gamers because its portable form factor and its power that was backing it at that time period was capable of running games that a lot of people didn't think were possible in a portable format. And of course, we did see the age of the Switch start to show pretty quickly, but it became still a popular choice because there weren't many other devices at that time period that could do what the original Switch could do. But times have changed, and we now have a bunch of different options with portable gaming PCs essentially that have started to take hold in the market. You have the Steamdeck, you have the Ally, you have a bunch of different options now to play games portably and play them pretty well. And that's where we saw Nintendo kind of falling behind a bit, because the Switch, especially earlier this year, completely showed its age as far as performance, as far as what it could do visually, and as far as what it could do in terms of keeping up with current generation games. And so when I saw the Nintendo Switch 2 was coming out, I became pretty excited. And I also got to a crossroad where I realized my aging Switch wasn't really keeping up, and I wanted to upgrade to something different. And whether that was getting the Switch 2 or getting a portable gaming PC, I was kind of up in the air for the past little while, really deciding, what am I going to do? What am I going to choose? Am I going to go back to the Nintendo ecosystem, or am I going to venture off into the portable PC gaming market, especially with the new Xbox Ally that just came out? However, I ultimately decided that my choice was the Switch 2. And in this video, I'm going to go over why the Switch 2, in my opinion, is a better choice for me and a better choice for some gamers in terms of what it offers with features, hardware, and just overall play style. So let's take a look. One of my first considerations when I was looking at the Switch 2 versus, the Steamdeck or the Ally Xbox Edition really came down to how the games are going to play. Now, there's going to be a bit of an asterisk here because the Steamdeck and the Xbox Ally, those two devices have a gargantuan library, a massive library. You have every single PC game essentially at your fingertips. However, the one fundamental issue that I have with that, and something that I researched pretty heavily, especially when it came to the Steamdeck and the existing Ally, was that the optimization isn't always there. For me, most of the games that I like are going to be on the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm, for example, going to be getting Cyberpunk for the Switch 2. I just got the Hitman game for the Switch 2. And so for me, those are games that I'm gonna put a ton of time into. Would I like more third-party games on the Switch 2? Absolutely, and it seems like we're starting to see that get answered slowly here. But the biggest thing about playing those on the Switch 2 to me is that because the Switch 2 is its own dedicated thing, it's not in its own ecosystem of gaming PC devices, it's considered a console for developers, we have a greater level of optimization, and we really saw this shine through with a game like Cyberpunk. Now, I want to set the expectation that it's not that the Ally or the Steamdeck couldn't run these games better than they currently run them, but the problem is that developers, unfortunately, won't typically take the time out to optimize those games for their respective hardware. And that's where we're going to see, in a lot of ways, some games that punch above their weight class on the Switch 2 purely because of optimization. And this argument isn't unique to the Switch 2. I've made this same argument when it comes to console gaming versus PC gaming, and you look at the hardware disparities, but we still see that the PS5 or the Xbox Series consoles pump out and deliver fantastic quality graphics that really, with their level of hardware, they probably shouldn't. That all comes down to optimization. And so for me, one of the big long-term considerations for the Switch 2 is the fact that we have a strong track record from the previous Switch that developers are going to try to maximize the specs on the Switch 2 to the best of their ability. However, the downside to this is you're not going to have the same level of library for the Switch 2 like you would on your Steamdeck or your Ally. But again, my whole point to this is that most of the games I'm going to play on the Switch 2, I'm going to be getting on this console, and most of the other options I have related to the Switch 2, like Nintendo's ecosystem, which I'll be talking about in a moment, a bit more deeper, are going to be available on the Switch 2. So the optimization for me was a big deal, and that was one of my main deciding factors for grabbing the Switch 2. Now, secondary to this is the playstyles on the Switch 2. I myself am a huge fan of the detachable controllers on the Switch 2. Now, interestingly enough, was not as big of a fan of them on the original Switch, and a lot of that came down to screen size. I find with the Switch 2, because we have a nice 7-inch screen, it's actually a feature that I'm using quite a bit. I am a person who has a pretty stationary gaming setup that's kind of out of the way from the rest of my house, but I have a busy family, and sometimes I'm going to be upstairs wanting to play a game, or sometimes I'm going to be outside and watching my kids and want to play a game. And so the fact that I can detach these Joy-Cons, put them on the Joy-Con cradle, and then have this set up pretty much anywhere is an appealing feature to me. It makes me feel like I'm still playing in my living room. And that's something that, it might seem trivial. I'm not saying that you might not be able to do these things on these other devices, but it was an extra layer of feature that, to me, made a lot of sense. And I also like the Nintendo peripherals. I don't like the price tag, but I like the Nintendo peripherals that you can get. I really like their Pro 2 controller, and I really like how that feels and plays on this device, and I like the infrastructure that Nintendo's provided for their various peripherals and accessories for this console. Now, lastly, and this is for some people a huge deal, and for some people not a huge deal. For me, it was. Well, I am a huge fan of the way Microsoft is allowing their games to be played on pretty much everything, potentially even the Switch 2. One of the things that we're probably not going to see with a Nintendo, and I believe this comes down to their very staunch approach to maximizing underpowered hardware, or just hardware in general, is we're not going to see Nintendo putting their games on other devices, and I don't believe that's going to be happening anytime soon. I think what you're going to see is that we're still going to have that very narrow focus from Nintendo with their hardware, which means that the Switch 2 is probably going to be the only way to play first-party Nintendo titles, which for some people is a bit of a bittersweet thing, but for me, I was already intending on getting the Switch 2 when I considered the optimization factors, and being able to play the latest Nintendo games the best possible way on the Switch 2 to me is important. And so that's something even so far I'm seeing with games like Donkey Kong Bonanza that have made this device worth really investing in. And I'm very excited to see some of the upcoming titles hit the Switch 2, like the Metroid Prime 4 and basically some of the standard streamlined Nintendo games that we expect. And for me, that was one of the large deciding factors as well for getting this console, was that, you know, being able to stick to that Nintendo ecosystem of their games, as well as some of the other perks like the Nintendo optimizing some of their previous libraries on the device. Those features to me made a lot of sense, and ultimately they might be something for some people that could care less. And if you probably don't care about the Nintendo ecosystem, you probably won't care as much for the third-party games being optimized on this device. I get that, but those two things together, for me, made a lot of sense for getting the Nintendo Switch 2 over some of the other devices that are on the market. And ultimately, I want to set the expectation. This video isn't bashing the Xbox Ally or the Steamdeck. It's more my insight as to why I picked the Switch 2 over those other devices. It's not to say that they're bad devices, and in my opinion, those devices most certainly have a place, and they have a lot of great features and appealing aspects to them that in some ways the Switch 2 doesn't necessarily have. But these are things for me that made these points that I'm bringing up, that I made here, are kind of why I picked my Switch 2 over the other devices. And I think for a lot of gamers, this is going to be a crossroad they're also going to be facing when it comes to investing in a new portable gaming device.